was a cold, rainy evening when Sarah's car broke down on a desolate road. She had been driving for hours, trying to get to her grandmother's house for the weekend. The storm was relentless, and her phone had no signal. Frustrated and wet, she spotted a dimly lit sign in the distance. Pine Hollow Motel. Sarah sighed in relief as she turned off the road and into the gravel driveway of the small, rundown motel. The building looked old, with peeling paint and flickering neon lights. It wasn't inviting, but it was better than staying in her car all night. She parked near the front office and grabbed her bag before heading inside. A small bell jingled as she opened the door. The reception area smelled musty, and a single bulb buzzed overhead. Behind the desk sat an elderly man with thick glasses, his face partially hidden in shadows. "Need a room?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "Yes, please," Sarah said, trying to sound polite despite her discomfort. "Just for the night?" "Yes, my car broke down," she explained. "I'll leave in the morning." The man nodded slowly and handed her a key. The tag attached read room 6. "Cash only," he said, holding out his hand. Sarah pulled out a few bills and gave them to him. He didn't say thank you, just muttered, "Don't wander around. Stay in your room." The warning sent a chill down her spine, but she dismissed it as odd old man behavior. Gripping her bag tightly, she stepped back into the rain and found room 6 at the far end of the row of units. The door creaked loudly as she opened it. The room was basic, a single bed with faded sheets, a small TV, and a dresser with a cracked mirror. The air smelled damp, and there were faint stains on the carpet. She shivered, feeling uneasy, but exhaustion got the better of her. She locked the door and double-checked it before collapsing onto the bed. Sarah woke up to the sound of dripping water. She groaned and sat up, looking around. The bathroom door was ajar, and she could hear the slow, steady drip of the faucet. Annoyed, she got up and went to tighten it. As she did, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror and froze. Her reflection seemed wrong. The image wasn't moving in sync with her. It blinked a moment after she did, and its mouth twitched in a way hers hadn't. She stumbled back, heart racing, and turned to look behind her, but the bathroom was empty. Shaking her head, she told herself it was just her imagination. She hurried back to bed and pulled the covers over herself, but sleep wouldn't come. A low, scratching noise began near the window. Sarah stiffened and held her breath, listening. The sound grew louder, more insistent. She crept to the window and peeked out through the curtains, but all she saw was darkness and the rain falling in heavy sheets. Just as she started to step away, a face suddenly appeared against the glass. A pale, hollow-eyed face with a twisted grin. Sarah screamed and stumbled backward, but when she looked again, it was gone. Terrified, Sarah grabbed her phone and tried again to call for help, but there was still no signal. She decided she couldn't stay in the room any longer. She threw on her jacket, grabbed her keys, and headed for the door. But when she unlocked it and tried to pull it open, it wouldn't budge. Panicked, she yanked harder, but the door seemed to be stuck as if something was holding it shut from the outside. She banged on it and screamed for help, but no one came. Suddenly, the scratching noise returned, this time from inside the room. She turned slowly, her eyes scanning the dimly lit space. Her breath caught when she saw the dresser. The drawers were rattling as if something inside was trying to get out. "No," she whispered, backing away. The rattling stopped abruptly, replaced by a deep, guttural laugh. Sarah's heart pounded as she stared at the dresser. The top drawer slid open slowly, and a dark, shadowy figure began to rise from it. Its form was human-like but distorted, with elongated limbs and glowing red eyes. Sarah screamed and ran to the bathroom, slamming the door shut behind her. She locked it and pressed her back against it, trembling. The laughter outside grew louder, echoing through the room. Then, the bathroom light flickered and went out, plunging her into darkness. In the pitch-black bathroom, Sarah fumbled for her phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam of light cut through the darkness, but it only made her feel more vulnerable. She aimed it at the mirror and nearly dropped the phone. Her reflection was back, but it wasn't her. The face in the mirror was grinning maliciously, its eyes black and soulless. It mouthed words she couldn't hear, but the meaning was clear. "You can't leave." Sarah turned away, her chest tight with fear. She had to get out no matter what. Summoning all her courage, she unlocked the bathroom door and burst back into the main room. The figure by the dresser was gone, but the air felt heavy, suffocating. She ran to the window, desperate to escape, and threw it open. Rain poured in, soaking her as she climbed out. She landed awkwardly on the wet ground and looked around. The parking lot was empty except for her car, but something about the motel felt wrong. It looked different now, older and more decayed. The neon sign was no longer lit, and the windows of the other rooms were boarded up. She ran to her car and fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking. Finally, she got the door open and jumped inside. She turned the key in the ignition, praying the car would start. It roared to life, and she didn't waste a second. She sped out of the lot and back onto the road, not daring to look back. After driving for what felt like hours, Sarah finally saw a gas station up ahead. She pulled in and ran inside, dripping wet and frantic. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, looked up in concern. "Are you okay?" the woman asked. "There's something wrong with the motel down the road," Sarah blurted. "Pine Hollow Motel. Something terrible happened there." The clerk's expression changed to one of confusion and pity. "Pine Hollow Motel? Honey, that place burned down years ago. It's been abandoned ever since." Sarah felt her blood run cold. "No, that's impossible. I was just there." The clerk shook her head. "People say it's haunted. Travelers who stop there. They never make it out." Sarah's legs felt weak, and she clutched the counter for support. She turned to look out the gas station window, half expecting to see the motel looming in the distance. But all she saw was her car, and in the back seat, the pale, hollow-eyed face grinning at her through the rain-soaked glass. She opened her mouth to scream, but the lights flickered, and everything went dark. When Sarah woke up, she wasn't in her car or the gas station. She was back in room 6 of the Pine Hollow Motel. The bed's rough, stained sheets clung to her damp clothes as she sat up, heart pounding. The room was silent except for the faint sound of rain tapping against the window. "No, no, no," she whispered, clutching her head. She had escaped. She knew she had escaped. But here she was, back in the same room that seemed to tighten its grip on her the longer she stayed. The door creaked open slowly. Sarah froze, staring at the widening gap. But no one stepped inside. Instead, a low whisper filled the room, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You can't leave," the voice hissed, soft yet menacing. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she bolted for the door, but when she reached it, it slammed shut on its own, almost catching her fingers. She stumbled back and turned to the window, but the view outside had changed. Instead of the rain-soaked parking lot, she saw an endless expanse of dark woods, their twisted branches reaching like skeletal hands toward the sky. "No!" she screamed, pounding on the window. "Let me out!" The laughter returned, deep and cruel, echoing from every corner of the room. The dresser's drawers began to rattle again, and this time so did the bed and the walls. The whole room seemed alive, pulsating with a dark, malevolent energy. Sarah's breath came in short, panicked gasps as she pressed herself against the wall, trying to find a way out. Then, the TV flickered to life. The screen was filled with static at first, but soon an image appeared. It was her, standing in the middle of the room, looking terrified. She stared at the screen in horror as the image of herself began to change. Her doppelganger in the TV turned to face the camera, its eyes pitch black, its mouth curling into a sinister grin. It raised a hand and pointed directly at her. Before Sarah could react, she felt an invisible force grip her throat. She clawed at her neck, struggling to breathe as she was lifted off the ground and slammed against the wall. The force held her there, her feet dangling inches above the floor. The voice returned, louder this time, filling her mind. "You belong to us now." Sarah's vision blurred as the pressure on her throat increased. Just as she thought she was about to lose consciousness, the force released her, and she crumpled to the floor, gasping for air. As she lay there, coughing and trembling, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was the same shadowy being she had seen before, with its elongated limbs and glowing red eyes. But now it spoke. "You don't have to suffer," it said, its voice deep and resonant. "You can leave, if you give us what we want." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "What do you want?" The figure tilted its head, almost mockingly. "Your soul." Her blood ran cold. No, I won't." "Then you'll stay here," the figure interrupted, its grin widening. "Forever, just like the others." As it spoke, the walls of the room seemed to shift, revealing faint, ghostly images of other people, travelers like her, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. They were trapped, their souls bound to the motel, their cries silent but filled with despair. Sarah's mind raced. If she refused, she would be trapped here forever, just like them. But if she agreed, what would that mean for her? Could she really give up her soul? Was there even a choice? "How do I know you'll let me go?" she asked, her voice trembling. The figure chuckled darkly. "You don't. But what other choice do you have?" She looked around the room, at the faces in the walls, at the flickering TV that still showed her distorted image. She thought of her family, her friends, and everything she had to live for. "Fine," she said finally, tears streaming down her face. "I'll do it." The figure stepped closer, its shadowy form towering over her. "Good. Now, repeat after me." It began to recite an incantation, the words foreign and guttural. Sarah repeated them, her voice shaking with every syllable. As she spoke, the room grew darker, the air heavier. The faces in the walls seemed to watch her, their expressions shifting to pity. When she finished the incantation, the figure placed a cold, clawed hand on her chest. Pain shot through her body as if her very essence was being torn away. She screamed, collapsing to the floor as the room spun around her. When Sarah opened her eyes, she was back in her car, parked on the side of the road where it had broken down. The rain had stopped, and the first light of dawn was breaking over the horizon. She sat up, her heart pounding. Was it over? Had she escaped? She looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes sunken, but she was alive. She started the car, and to her surprise, it roared to life. Without hesitation, she drove away as fast as she could, not daring to look back at the road where Pine Hollow Motel had stood. But as she drove, a chilling realization dawned on her. Something was wrong. The world outside seemed off. The colors were muted, the air heavy with an unnatural stillness. She glanced at her reflection again and froze. The face staring back at her wasn't hers. It was the grinning, hollow-eyed doppelganger from the TV. And then she heard the voice. "You're free, Sarah, but now I'm in control." Her scream echoed through the empty road as the car disappeared into the mist, leaving no trace behind. Some say you can still see Sarah's car on foggy nights, driving endlessly down the same stretch of road. But if you look too closely, you might notice the driver isn't quite human. And if you're unlucky enough to stop at the Pine Hollow Motel, you might just find yourself making the same choice she did. Sarah's car seemed to drive itself now. Her hands clung to the wheel, but she couldn't feel the grip. It was as though she had become a passenger in her own body. The road ahead stretched endlessly, shrouded in mist. She tried to scream again, but her voice was gone, swallowed by the silence. Her reflection in the mirror continued to grin, mocking her helplessness. She tried to look away, but her head wouldn't turn. It was as if her body was no longer hers to control. "Where are you taking me?" she thought, unable to speak the words aloud. The answer came in the voice she had come to dread, the guttural, menacing tone of the shadowy figure from the motel. "Home," it said. The car began to slow, though Sarah hadn't touched the brakes. Ahead, the mist parted, revealing a landscape that wasn't part of the world she knew. The road was cracked and jagged, the trees on either side twisted and lifeless. The sky above was a sickly gray, and the air shimmered as though it were alive. The car came to a stop in front of a massive structure. It wasn't the Pine Hollow Motel anymore, but something far worse. The building was larger, its walls blackened and pulsing as if they were made of living flesh. The neon sign above it flickered, spelling out a new name, the Eternal Rest. The car door opened on its own, and Sarah felt herself being pulled out. Her legs moved without her command, dragging her toward the entrance. She tried to resist, but it was no use. The motel loomed larger with every step, its many windows glowing with a faint, eerie light. As she crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind her, sealing her inside. Inside, the air was heavy and stifling. The walls were lined with doors, each one identical to the next. Sarah's legs carried her down the hallway, past door after door. From behind each one, she could hear whispers, cries, and laughter, sounds that chilled her to her core. At last, she stopped in front of a door marked 6. It looked exactly like the room she had stayed in before, but this time she felt a deep, suffocating dread. The door creaked open, revealing the same sparse furnishings, the bed, the dresser, the TV with its cracked screen. But this time the room was already occupied. Sitting on the bed was a figure, Sarah's doppelganger. Its black eyes gleamed as it smiled at her, its teeth sharp and unnatural. "You didn't think you'd escape, did you?" it asked, its voice dripping with mockery. Sarah tried to speak, but no sound came out. The doppelganger stood and walked toward her, its movements unnaturally smooth. "You gave us your soul," it said, "and now you're one of us." The doppelganger stepped closer, and Sarah felt a burning sensation in her chest. She gasped as her reflection in the dresser mirror began to shift, her face twisted, her eyes darkening, her features becoming sharper and more monstrous. "No," she wanted to scream, but the transformation continued. Her skin turned pale, almost translucent, and her hair grew long and wild. Her hands, once her own, now had claw-like fingers that flexed against her will. "You're the new keeper," the doppelganger said, stepping aside to let Sarah see herself fully in the mirror. "It's your turn to welcome the next guest." Sarah's mind reeled as the truth sank in. She was trapped, doomed to lure others into the motel's grasp. The shadowy figure's voice echoed in her mind. "Every soul you claim will bring you closer to freedom. But beware, some will resist, fail, and you'll remain here forever." The thought was unbearable, but Sarah had no choice. The pull of the motel was too strong. Days, or perhaps years, passed in the timeless void of the motel. Sarah waited, her new form blending seamlessly with the shadows. She watched as the mist outside shifted, signaling the arrival of another traveler. The door to the motel creaked open, and a man stepped inside. He looked confused and tired, his clothes soaked from the rain. "Hello?" he called out, his voice trembling. "Is anyone here?" Sarah stepped forward, her new body moving with an unnatural grace. Her voice, no longer her own, came out soft and welcoming. "Welcome to the eternal rest," she said, her smile hiding the torment within. "We've been expecting you." As the man took the key she handed him, Sarah felt a pang of guilt, but the shadowy figure's warning echoed in her mind. "Claim him, or you'll stay here forever." With every step the man took toward his room, Sarah felt her humanity slipping further away. Yet deep inside, a small spark of defiance remained. Sarah began to wonder, could she break the cycle? Could she find a way to free not just herself, but all the souls trapped in the motel? For now, she had to play her role, but she vowed that no matter what, she would find a way to destroy the eternal rest and the evil that controlled it. And so, as the doors to room 6 closed behind the unsuspecting guest, Sarah prepared for her next move. The battle for her soul wasn't over yet. Sarah's days, or what passed for days in the timeless motel, were spent trapped between despair and defiance. She had lured 2 more travelers into the motel's clutches, each time feeling a piece of her remaining humanity slip away. But she hadn't given up. She had learned something important. Every soul she claimed brought her closer to the center of the motel's dark power. Room 6. The whispers behind the walls had hinted at it. The faces in the mirrors, flickering with anguish, had mouthed the same words. The heart lies in room 6. This was no ordinary room. It wasn't just a prison. It was the source of the motel's curse. If she could reach it, perhaps she could end this nightmare. Sarah's reflection in the mirror had become her only companion, though it no longer resembled her. The shadowy, monstrous figure she had become stared back at her, its black eyes filled with bitterness and cunning. "I need to get into room 6, she said aloud, testing the strength of her voice. She still wasn't sure if she could defy the motel's unseen master. If I can destroy whatever's in there, I can stop them. Her reflection smirked. You're a fool if you think it'll let you. The room isn't just locked, it's alive, and it will fight back. Then I'll fight harder, Sarah snapped. I won't stay here forever. I'll save myself and the others. Her reflection rolled its dark eyes, but didn't argue further. Deep down, Sarah knew the reflection wasn't truly her enemy. It was a distorted version of her, twisted by the motel's influence, but still bound to her will. She could use that to her advantage. The next guest arrived on a stormy night, much like Sarah's first encounter with the motel. This time, it was a young woman. Her face pale and drawn, Sarah felt a pang of recognition. The woman's fear mirrored her own when she had first stepped into this night. Welcome, Sarah said, handing the woman the key to room 5 instead of the cursed room 6. As the woman hesitated, Sarah leaned in and whispered, Stay in your car. Drive away. Don't come back. The woman looked confused, but fear and intuition made her follow Sarah's advice. She turned and ran, leaving the key behind. As the door closed behind the guest, the air in the motel grew heavy. A cold, angry wind whipped through the hallway, extinguishing the faint lights. Sarah's reflection in the nearby mirror grinned wickedly. You broke the rules, it said. Good, Sarah muttered, clenching her fists. Let it come for me. The storm inside the motel grew fiercer, and Sarah knew she had to act quickly. She grabbed the key she had once used, room 6, and approached the door. The hallway seemed longer than before, stretching endlessly as if the motel was trying to keep her away. But she pushed forward, every step fueled by anger and determination. When she reached the door, she hesitated. The whispers from the walls grew louder, forming an incoherent chorus of warnings and pleas. Ignoring them, she inserted the key and turned it. The door didn't creak open like the others. Instead, it seemed to dissolve, revealing a swirling void of black and crimson light. A gust of wind pulled at her, dragging her inside. The room was vast, far larger than it had any right to be. Its walls pulsed with dark energy, and at its center stood the shadowy figure she had come to hate. Its glowing red eyes burned brighter than ever, and its voice echoed with power. You dare to defy me? It roared. Sarah stood her ground. I'm done playing your game. I'll destroy this place and free the souls you've taken. The figure laughed, a sound that shook the very floor. You think you have power here? You're nothing. Just another soul bound to my will. But Sarah had been planning for this moment. She reached into the pocket of her jacket and pulled out a shard of glass she had taken from the mirror. It pulsed faintly with energy, her connection to the other souls trapped in the motel. This isn't just my fight, she said, gripping the shard tightly. You've taken too many. It ends now. The figure lunged at her, its shadowy limbs reaching to engulf her. Sarah dodged, driving the shard into the floor. Light erupted from the point of impact, and the walls of the room began to crack and splinter. The faces of the trapped souls appeared in the fractures, their expressions shifting from despair to hope. Sarah felt their energy surging through her, strengthening her resolve. You can't destroy me, the figure hissed, its form flickering as the light grew brighter. I am this place. I am eternal. Not anymore, Sarah said. She plunged the shard into her own chest, releasing the combined power of all the souls the motel had taken. The light intensified, consuming the room and the figure within it. The last thing Sarah saw was the shadowy figure dissolving into the light, its screams fading into nothingness. When Sarah opened her eyes, she was lying on the side of the road. The morning sun was rising, its warmth a stark contrast to the cold, oppressive darkness she had endured. She sat up and looked around. The Pine Hollow Motel was gone, replaced by an overgrown lot. She touched her chest, expecting to feel the wound from the shard, but there was nothing. She was whole, free. As she stood and began walking down the road, she felt a sense of peace. The other souls were gone too, finally at rest. The motel's curse had been broken. But deep in the shadows of the forest, a faint flicker of red light remained, waiting for its chance to return. Sarah stopped, sensing it but refusing to look back. Not this time, she whispered, her voice steady. Not ever again. And with that, she walked into the light, leaving the horrors of Pine Hollow behind her for good.